Napoleon and His Son by Pierre Nezelof. Chapter 1. A Fine Match. The lesson was over. The music master put down his baton. "I suppose your Highness has heard the news," he remarked. The Archduchess Marie-Louise pushed her stool back from the piano, on which a Haydn concerto lay open. "No, I haven't, Kozluch," she said. "What is it?" The music master fluffed up his white muslin cravat. He avoided looking at his pupil as he replied, in a casual tone, "The divorce between Napoleon and Josephine was pronounced on December 15th last." Marie-Louise's hand crashed onto the keyboard, striking a plaintive discord. "The Corsican, he's divorced, you say?" "It's official, your Highness. The news was published in the Allgemeine Zeitung. There are some things which, once said, render the atmosphere leaden, dim the daylight, and make misfortune take shape." "Good gracious!" exclaimed the girl. "And I never knew. They won't let me read any newspapers except the Frankfurt Gazette. Still, I don't see how this divorce can directly concern us. If Napoleon has repudiated his wife," the music master went on, "it is, I imagine, with the intention of marrying again." "I suppose so." The threat was becoming more definite. Marie-Louise gazed out of the window with stricken eyes. Before her, below the palace, flowed the Danube. A few months ago, it had borne along the naked, rotting bodies of soldiers who had fallen at Essling and Wagram. There were, alas, many more Austrians than Frenchmen. On the other side of the river, opposite Buda, the city of Pest spread out fan-wise on the plain, bathed in the chilly sunlight of a bright January morning. Marie-Louise felt as though a great shadow had fallen across the limpid landscape. She shuddered, rose to her feet, and walked briskly across the room. She was a tall girl of 18, rather thin, with Wedgwood blue eyes. Her long hair, parted in the middle, hung in big clusters on either side of her face. Her forehead was high. Her cheeks were pitted with smallpox and blotched with red. Her lips were thick, but disclosed white, sound teeth. Her chin was heavy, and her figure was neither graceful nor supple. She came to a standstill before the fireplace, and held out her hands to the fire, as though beseeching it to help her. After a moment or two, pursuing her train of thought, she said, "Of course he'll get married again, but there are plenty of princesses in Europe." Kozluch smiled and bowed, like a perfect courtier. "That is quite true, your Highness, but I assume that he will have the sense to choose the best educated, the best looking, the best in every respect. He will want her not only to give him the heir he desires, but also to make him happy. In all Europe, I can see only one. Panting, Marie-Louise turned towards her music master. What do you mean, Kozluch? Have you been told to approach me? It's not possible. The Corsican can't be thinking about me. You go about a lot, Kozluch. You meet plenty of people. Please tell me what they are saying. It's only rumor, Your Highness, replied the music master diffidently. But I'm bound to say that in fact there is a great deal of talk about you. Allow me to add that Napoleon could not make a better choice. Marie-Louise's flesh crept. Be quiet. How could I marry that man? I hate him. I despise him. She wanted to run away, to escape the danger that threatened her. She was like a hunted animal, sensing the huntsman's approach, and trembling with fright and impotence. Ah, she wailed, why didn't Frederick Stops stab him to the heart last October at Schönbrunn? If he had succeeded in killing him, what a deliverance it would have been for the world. No, no, I won't give myself to that man. Look at all the harm he's done to our country, to our house. It's only 3 months since he imposed a humiliating, dishonorable peace upon us. He's robbed us of Salzburg, Trieste, Istria, Carniola, part of Galicia, most of Croatia, and all our maritime provinces. Now is he going to demand the daughter of the man he defeated? Is he an absolute ogre? Is there no satisfying him? But Papa is too kind-hearted to make me act against my will in a matter which means so much to me. Kozluch prudently beat a retreat. The Emperor has never sought anything but the happiness of his peoples, and the happiness of his august children. It is quite obvious that in this case your Highness need have no occasion for anxiety, so I hope you will not take what I have said in bad part. I have simply told you what I've heard, idle rumors, chit-chat, things of no importance. Marie-Louise raised her hand. Very well, Kozluch. You may go. I shall expect you tomorrow as usual. We'll go over that sonata of Mozart's again. Once she was alone, Marie-Louise stood irresolutely for a moment or two, with her arms hanging lax. Then she caught sight of a little white dog asleep on a cushion beside the fireplace. She knelt down, took the dog in her arms, and suddenly burst into tears. Tisby, the little dog, thus rudely awakened, recognized her mistress. She put out her tongue and started licking Marie-Louise all over the face, lapping up her big, warm, salty tears. Good dog, Tisby. Did you hear what he said? They want to marry me to the Corsican. And I'm barely 18. Only 18. But it will never happen. Papa won't make me marry that devil. Papa loves me. He won't make me break my heart. He won't spoil my whole life. He's so kind-hearted. I'm his favorite little girl, and he knows that I adore him, not only admire him. She stopped for a moment. Then, with revolt bursting out of her all at once, she cried, I was so happy. Why should that man Napoleon ever have thought about me? He's a butcher. He's a monster. He's a usurper. He's Antichrist himself. In a fury, the Duchess Marie-Louise spat 3 times running into the fire by way of averting this misfortune. Indeed, the members of the House of Austria in general, and its head, the Emperor Francis II in particular, had good reason for grievance against Napoleon. For nearly 14 years the Emperor Francis had been fighting against Napoleon. The drubbings which the damnable Corsican had inflicted upon him were by now almost beyond counting. Every battlefield in Europe had seen the Austrians in their great coats in retreat, pursued by the bayonets of Ney's infantry or the sabres of Murat's cavalry. Even this would not have been so bad, but for the fact that whenever peace was patched up, the Corsican ogre sat down to table and gobbled up some part of the Austrian Empire in big mouthfuls. At Campo Formio he swallowed the Netherlands, the left bank of the Rhine, and Lombardy. At Luneville he made a meal of Tuscany and a large part of Italy. At Pressburg he finished off Italy and started on Germany. At Schönbrunn he went on in the same way, still with fine appetite. Another feast like that, and nothing would be left of the Austrian Empire but crumbs. Vienna was overflowing with princes and archdukes, allies of the imperial family, whom that cursed Napoleon had driven out of their kingdoms or their duchies. At their head figured Francis's own aunt, Marie Antoinette's sister, the Queen of Naples, Marie Caroline, a woman too temperamental, though with a head on her shoulders, who had been forced in 1806 to surrender her throne to Josephine Bonaparte. The Emperor of the French indeed excelled at juggling with thrones and duchies. When he got tired of playing with them, he tossed them away to those around him, just as he might throw largesse to the poor. Then it was a question of who could catch them, his brothers, his sisters, his friends, or his generals, all barely rid of the mire of beggary. A man who yesterday had been a groom sat down today as master in a palace, the steps of which he would not have been thought good enough to sweep in normal times. Besides 2 ruinous demands, there had been added hurts to proper pride. There were so many of these that the Emperor Francis had given up trying to keep exact count of them, but some of them had left their mark upon his memory as a sovereign. After Austerlitz, he had been forced to go in person and sue for peace in his conqueror's camp. This same conqueror in 1806 had wrested from him the crown of German emperor, the title of head of the Germanic Holy Roman Empire, the title of spokesman and temporal head of Christendom, which his ancestors had borne ever since 962. The Napoleonic storm had swept it away, as it had everything else. Then there had been those inglorious flights before the victorious invader. 3 times Francis had had to bolt from his capital, like a hare with a greyhound after it. The last misadventure of this kind was quite recent. Marie-Louise still kept the memory of it in her mind, a memory both vivid and burning. It was due to the intrigues of her stepmother, the Empress Maria Ludovica, the Emperor Francis's third wife. Her whole family had been driven out of Italy and ruined by the French. She was very small, and all made up of fire and passion. She held her husband through his senses, which are always a sure rein with which to ride a man. She hated the French, and plotted their downfall. The hour of her revenge seemed to have struck. Napoleon was at grips with the Spaniards, and had even suffered a defeat at Balen. With the help of England, Austria formed the Fifth Coalition. But the Emperor of the French was too quick. The ogre shot himself with 7-league boots. On April 20th, 1809, he was at Strasbourg. By the 24th, he was at Ratisbon. At the news of the Battle of Eckmühl, Marie-Louise clapped her hands. She wrote to her father gaily, "They say that Napoleon was present at this big battle which he lost. May he lose his head too." But despite the Austrian victory, Napoleon threatened Vienna. Once more the imperial family had to pack their trunks. They scattered in all directions. The Empress Maria Ludovica fled to Buda, taking Marie-Louise with her. This was on May 5th. It was wet, and the roads were quagmires. The ladies reached Hungary half dead from fatigue. Then came the news of the Battle of Essling. Once more it was an Austrian victory. "This is the first time," wrote Marie-Louise, "that Napoleon has been beaten in person." But Buda, in its turn, became unsafe. The French, ever victorious, were approaching. Would it come to taking refuge in the antipodes in order to escape them? The fugitives and their suite made their way to Eylau, a little town situated on a tributary of the river Theiss. There they camped, almost eaten alive by bugs. The Empress fell ill, and so did Marie-Louise herself. At length, after the Battle of Wagram, all the imperial family came together again at Buda, where they awaited events. On October 14th, peace was signed at Vienna. Then arose the question of returning to the capital, where Napoleon was still installed at Schönbrunn as master. At the mere idea of finding herself face to face with him, Marie-Louise nearly fainted. "That would be a torture worse than all the martyrdom we have endured," she cried. This plan remained in suspense. Only the Emperor Francis returned to his capital, where he was greeted by the cheers of his subjects. All the other members of the imperial family remained at Buda, where they passed their time very pleasantly with driving and music and dancing. Marie-Louise found a perfect partner in the person of the Archduke Francis, her stepmother's brother. He had a fetching beard, sang charmingly, played duets on the piano with her, and waltzed like a young god. What more could one want to set the heart of an archduchess beating faster? But just when she might have thought that she and her family were delivered from Napoleon, the shadow of the terrible Corsican fell upon her, like a net over a bird. She had given up thinking about him, but he had been thinking about her. Marie-Louise felt that she was lost. She knew him if he said, "It is my will." The thing was done. Must she be the victim offered as a sacrifice to the Minotaur? Only one hope remained to her. She put her trust in the Emperor Francis, the best of fathers. She did not yet realize that, while his heart was paternal, his bowels were political. Chapter 2. The Sacrifice. On January 23rd, 1810, in the morning, the Emperor Francis arrived in Buda unexpectedly. At the news of his arrival, Marie-Louise felt her knees giving way under her. Only a matter of importance could have taken him away from Vienna and brought him here at such a time. A few minutes later, she stood before him, trembling all over. She stared at him, stricken. He was clad in all gray as usual, a gray frock coat open over a gray waistcoat, gray breeches tucked into high boots. No emotion was registered on his long, melancholy, florid face. For the first time, Marie-Louise fancied she could catch a glimpse of a retiring, shrinking soul behind his mouth. With its thick, loose lips, his high forehead, with gray hair growing back from it, his deep blue eyes, with heavy pouches beneath them. "My child," he said, "I have a serious subject to discuss with you." "I am listening, Papa," stammered Marie-Louise. "You are doubtless aware that Napoleon divorced his wife last month. He is in search of a princess whom—" Marie-Louise did not let her father finish. "Father," she cried, in a horrified voice, "I know what you are going to say, but I can't marry Napoleon. I can't. "Nothing is decided yet," the Emperor put in gently. "Don't alarm yourself unnecessarily. We have not yet received any official request, but it may arrive at any moment. For that matter, there is no need for such a marriage. We shall soon be rid of the Corsican. A Viennese astrologer has read in the stars that he is going to die this year of cholera, in Cologne, at an inn called the Red Crab." The Emperor did his best to smile. He took his daughter by the hand and drew her to him. "Let's be serious, Marie-Louise. I will not hide from you the fact that Napoleon is indeed thinking about you." "Oh," cried Marie-Louise, "surely you're not going to make me marry him." "I have no intention of putting any compulsion upon you, my child, but in the circumstances in which my empire is at present placed, I find myself forced to ask you to help me." Aghast, Marie-Louise gazed at her father. She had counted on him to protect her. She found him foremost, its readiness to sacrifice her. But she still refused to contemplate such sacrilege, such a crime against nature. She would fight till she had exhausted all her arguments, all her strength. "Have you really reflected about this, Papa? How can you agree to give your own daughter to the leader of the revolution, the usurper whose people guillotined your aunt, Marie Antoinette? Don't you know that these French are worse than the Huns? They have expelled God from their country and massacred their priests. In our own countryside they have laid everything waste, with fire, sack, and laughter. They have not spared even the monasteries. Last year, in the Tyrol, they threw 4 monks into a furnace. At Schwechat, they pulled out the Capuchins' beards. At Lasendorf, 3 monks died because of their treatment. Then their leader, that Attila, had done violence to the Pope. He keeps the Pope prisoner. He mocks at being excommunicated. For that matter, don't they say that he turned Turk in Egypt? He beats his servants. He kills his generals when he's not satisfied with them. No, no, Papa, you can't make me marry a man like that. Have pity on me, I beseech you." Marie-Louise flung herself to her knees. She crouched on the floor, weeping and wringing her hands. Gently, the Emperor lifted her up. He brushed back the hair from her tear-stained cheeks. "My child," he said, with a sigh, "for people like us, for kings and princes, who have nations in their care, marriage is not an affair of the heart, it is an affair of state." Marie-Louise stared at her father in surprise. These were strange words from a man who apparently was conjugal before all else, and who claimed that happiness was to be found only in marriage. Despite appearances to the contrary, the Emperor Francis was a terror of a husband. He had already been the death of 2 empresses. He had exhausted the first within 2 years. He had procreated 13 children, not counting miscarriages, in 17 years of marriage with his second empress, Marie-Louise's mother, who died in 1807. He was now gradually wearing out Marie Ludovica, his third empress. He had married her after a widowerhood of 9 months, which he found unendurable. "So you say marriage is an affair of state, father," Marie-Louise replied, in a tone of voice which had suddenly become firmer. "Then why do you want to give a daughter of your house, the most ancient house in Europe, a daughter of the Habsburg family, which has known no misalliance in 10 centuries, to an adventurer who represents nothing, a Corsican of dubious birth, and the bitterest enemy of Austria, which he has robbed of her best provinces?" The Emperor looked away in embarrassment. "You are still too young, my daughter," he said in a hollow, harsh tone of voice, "to understand much about political affairs. But let me tell you that nobody has more hatred than I have for this man, for his country, and for its revolution, whose offspring have defeated us, derided us, dispossessed us. We are not strong enough for them on the field of battle, but there are other weapons. You are one such weapon, and we count on you." Marie-Louise hung her head. She felt overwhelmed in advance with the weight of the responsibility which threatened her. The Emperor's voice rang more gravely as he went on speaking slowly. It was the voice of the head of the state. He spoke of the confidence which millions of families placed in him. I emphasize, Marie-Louise, that it is you who must overcome the revolution. Think it over, my child. I do not wish to put any compulsion upon you, but on your decision will depend the greatness, the whole future of our house. Marie-Louise stiffened. Another argument came into her mind. And suppose I refuse? Suppose I prefer to go into a convent? I know you too well, my daughter. You will not refuse. You will not shrink from your duty. But if by chance you should take a decision so contrary to the interest of your country, you would put us in a cruelly embarrassing position. Metternich has virtually given his word. He is committed. Ah, Metternich! Marie-Louise shuddered. The mere mention of that name made a chill run down her back. Was not the Chancellor the real master of Austria? Who could resist the will of that all-powerful minister? His fixed stare, seeping beneath his lowered lids, froze you to the heart and set even archdukes stammering in his presence. Marie-Louise was vanquished. "Very well, father," she said. "I shall do as you wish. I am ready to sacrifice my personal happiness for the good of the state." The emperor was touched. He stroked his daughter's hair. "I did not expect anything else from you. I know how high-minded you are." All at once, Marie-Louise flung her arms around her father's neck. She was a sentimental young girl. As she had listened to waltz music by moonlight, she had often dreamed of a Prince Charming. Her whole soul rose to her lips in revolt. "But still, papa," she murmured, "Napoleon. Why, he's as old as you are." It was her final flicker of rebellion. The emperor smiled. "He's a year younger, my child," he corrected, gently. "After all, that's better than nothing, isn't it? And now you may go back to your brothers and sisters." Docilely, Marie-Louise obeyed. She felt exhausted, and her head was burning. In a neighboring room, there were sounds of a disturbance. Marie-Louise's brothers and sisters, ranging from Ferdinand, who was 16, to Marie-Anne, who was 4, were gathered around a big table. They were playing at soldiers. Whole rows of French grenadiers strewed the battlefield, bearing witness to the superiority of Austrian generalship. "We've won!" cried Marie Leopoldine. "They're all dead." Marie-Louise did her best to smile. Then she swung round, exclaiming. Francis Charles, who was 7, had thrown into the fire one of the finest dolls she possessed, and was poking at it eagerly, laughing for all he was worth. "Have you gone mad, Francis?" demanded Marie-Louise. "What are you thinking about burning my doll like that?" The boy turned round, planted himself in front of her, and answered proudly, "Leave me alone, little sister. Can't you see I'm roasting the Corsican?" He expected a box on the ear. He was very much surprised to find himself lifted up in the air and kissed. As Marie-Louise's voice murmured into his ear, "Ah, child, if you only knew how much good you've done me." Definitely beaten, Marie Louise laid down her arms. Since it must be so, she would become the wife of Antichrist. Yet her sacrifice meant paying a cruel price. She would have to leave her country. She would have to give up Francis. He would have made a perfect husband for her, and she was on the point of falling in love with him. She would be going away from her family, perhaps forever. Never again would she go to the Angchow meadows to gather veronica and make tea with it. Never again would she water the flowers in her garden, which she herself had planted. There would be no more walks in the Schönbrunn woods, no more fishing for crabs, and who would look after her turtle doves, and have the hare she had tamed? Every one of these thoughts was like a stab in the heart to her, but who among those around her was capable of understanding her, sympathizing with her? Even her great-aunt Marie Caroline, the ex-queen of Naples, dethroned by Napoleon, treated her marriage as a joke. So I'm going to become the great-aunt of the devil, am I? Said Marie Caroline with a chuckle. Chapter 3. I Must Marry a Womb. At last, the act from which Napoleon had shrunk for so many years was on the point of being accomplished. On his return to the Tuileries from Schönbrunn at the end of October 1809, he had made up his mind he would break with Josephine. She had lost her looks. She was showing her age. Napoleon knew that before she settled down. She had betrayed him over and over again. Yet force of habit, her appeal to his senses, tender memories of their youth, still kept him strongly attached to her. It was Josephine who had taught him the delights of love. She was Napoleon's lucky star, his talisman of fortune. He appreciated the help she had given him in all circumstances, as well as her shrewdness, her subtlety, her tact, her intelligence. She would never get over it. It would be the death of her, he said to himself. Besides, what was the good of divorcing Josephine and marrying again, if he was incapable of procreating a child? Still, he must think about the future. To whom would he leave the empire? In default of a natural heir, Napoleon contemplated adopting one. His desire to establish a dynasty demanded that his family traits should be found in his successor to the throne. Then his brother Louis Bonaparte married to Hortense de Beauharnais, had a son by her, the first male child born to the family. Napoleon decided to choose little Napoleon Charles as his successor. Everything now seemed settled, and Josephine imagined that she could end her days peacefully as empress. But at this point various things happened. In 1806, Napoleon had a brief love affair with a reading woman of his sister's, Caroline Murat, and of this adventure a son was born, who was the living image of him. A few months later, on May 5th, 1807, Napoleon Charles, little Non, his heir presumptive, died at The Hague, carried off by a malignant fever. At about the same time in Poland, Napoleon made a conquest of fair, sweet Marie Walewska. This fresh love affair served to alienate him still further from Josephine. Meanwhile, warnings of fate seemed to become more and more imperative. At the Battle of Ratisbon, Napoleon was wounded in the foot. A little later, at Schönbrunn, the student Frederick Stops was seized just as he was about to plunge a knife into Napoleon's breast. These events set the Emperor of the French thinking. He was at the mercy of a bullet or a dagger, and France and the Empire were at their mercy too. Finally, on his departure from Schönbrunn, Madame Walewska, who had joined him some months earlier, told him that she was about to become a mother. Sometimes, when he was tired or at night, when he could not sleep, Napoleon questioned himself. For whom was he laboring? For whom had he turned the world upside down? For whom was destined this colossal edifice which he had fashioned by his genius, built by cannon shot, and cemented with the blood of a score of nations? If he died, what would become of his achievement, his gigantic empire, embracing France and part of Germany and Italy, stretching from the Tiber to the Elbe? What would become of its feudatory states, Naples, Spain, Holland, Württemberg, Westphalia? Was it all for nothing that he had dismembered and ruined Austria, despoiled Prussia, crushed Russia, driven the Bourbons out of Spain, and deprived the Pope of the Papal States, and shut him up in Savona? Apart from England, that island shivering with terror, what country in Europe could boast that it had never known the hoofs of his hussars' horses, the wheels of his cannon? Was nothing to be left of him, of his flesh, of his mind, of his life? Was the grave, was death, to make an utter end of him? His family, Napoleon knew them well enough. His brothers were envious nobodies, whose ingratitude sometimes bordered on treason. His sisters were women dominated by their senses, by ambition, by petty questions of precedence. There was not one among them who did not imagine that the wealth, the place, the power that Napoleon had given them were due to their own merits. There was not one among them capable of carrying on his work. If he died, all these people would tear one another to pieces, and there would be a general collapse. Ah, how furiously, how frantically he had sometimes longed to have a son of his own! What would he not give to be like a humble farmer, who, as he added one field to another, could say to himself, "I can be easy in my mind, all this will go to my son. I shall not have labored in vain." And now, all at once, the face of the world was changed. For him, he was capable of procreating a child. He had proved it twice over. All was not yet lost. He would divorce Josephine. He would marry again. A son would be born to him. He would perpetuate himself. He would outlive himself. What he dug in history, in time, would not be a hole soon filled up again, but a furrow in which his seed would germinate, from which life would spring of itself. Now, it was not simply because of himself that he must break with Josephine. It was because of the 130 departments of France. It was the 60 million people in Europe, in allegiance to him. It was his whole empire which refused to die. Though he had made up his mind to divorce Josephine, Napoleon did not disguise from himself how hard the task was to which he was setting his hand. The sentimental side of the matter struck him as not the least delicate. He shrank from inflicting pain upon his life's companion. He went on wrestling with himself. It was as though some obscure force, a kind of instinct, kept him bound to Josephine. But reason of state had spoken. He must act. In the first place, he must break his twofold link with Josephine, the civil link, the religious link. Despite all her tears, all her hysterics, the Empress had to bow to his will. On December 15th, 1809, Josephine gave her consent to a divorce. The next day, a decree of the Senate pronounced the dissolution of the civil marriage. Then, on January 10th, 1810, diocesan authority annulled the religious union. Napoleon was free. Now he had to choose a new empress. For a time, he played with the idea of marrying Lolotte, his brother Lucian's daughter, but she was his niece, and she was only 15, so he gave up this idea and thought about Princess Charlotte of Bavaria, sister of Eugene de Beauharnais' wife. But a sense of the ridiculous held him back. How could he become the brother-in-law of his own stepson? Then he offered the Empress's crown to Marie Walewska. She refused it. Napoleon made the best of that. Marie, that pure, sweet soul, would still remain his refuge in bad times. Her fidelity, her affection, would be balm for weariness and depression. In view of these circumstances, he decided he would choose the princess who would bring the most advantage to his empire and furnish the strongest support of his policy. Above all, he would choose a woman whom he might confidently expect to bear him children. "I must marry a womb," he put it to Champagne. So the Minister for Foreign Affairs sought for a suitable womb. The courts of Europe were not lacking in such wombs, and very noble ones too. 3 candidates were lined up: a princess of Saxony, the Grand Duchess Anna, youngest sister of the Tsar Alexander, and the Archduchess Marie-Louise, eldest daughter of the Austrian Emperor. In fact, ever since 1803, Austria had been contemplating a matrimonial alliance with France. In 1807, after Tilsit, Metternich had offered an archduchess to Napoleon, but at that time the Emperor of the French had gibed at the idea. Mary, a grand niece of Marie Antoinette, whose blood was scarcely dry in the Place de la Revolution. He could not think of it. What would the people say, with their memories still vivid with pictures of Danton, Marat, Robespierre, and all those famous fellows who had cut off Monsieur Capet's head? Personally, Napoleon inclined towards the Russian marriage. On November 22nd, 1809, Champagne instructed Caulaincourt the French ambassador in Russia to ask Alexander for one of the Grand Duchesses. Once the letter was dispatched, Napoleon waited impatiently, but after all he must be prepared for a refusal, and in that case he must save his face. As it happened, at the end of November, Metternich made another approach to him. The Emperor Francis was still ready to bestow an archduchess upon the master of France. Napoleon lent ear to this offer, and did not say no. For that matter, such an alliance would be well regarded in aristocratic circles. Josephine herself was in favor of it. She would feel less humiliated if a Habsburg princess replaced her on the throne which she had had to abandon. At length, 2 months later, on January 26th, the reply from Russia arrived. It played for time. The Tsar took refuge behind the will of the Empress Mother, who alone had the right to dispose of her daughters. Promptly, without loss of time, Napoleon fell back on the Austrian marriage. An archduchess would do better after all. The House of Lorraine, grafted onto the Habsburgs, went back to the 10th century. It could count its ancestors over a period of 900 years. For the last 300 years, an alluring example, it was in Austria that the kings of France had sought their queens. And how fertile were these Austrian archduchesses! Frances I and Marie Theresa had had 16 children. Francis II, the present emperor, had 13. As for Marie Theresa's daughters, Marie Caroline of Naples had brought 17 into the world, and Marie Amélie of Parma 6. To be sure, Marie Antoinette had had only 4, but then look at her husband. These girls were certainly child producers. Napoleon made his decision. Let it be put in effect at once. It was Eugene de Beauharnais whom Napoleon instructed to make the necessary overtures for replacing his own mother Josephine. Everything must be done within 48 hours. The Emperor of the French could wait no longer. On February 6th, in the morning, Eugene presented himself at the Austrian embassy. Schwarzenberg was out hunting. He was sent for. Eugene explained to him what Napoleon wanted. The marriage contract must be drawn up within the next few hours. Marie Antoinette's marriage contract would serve as a model. The Austrian ambassador was frightened by the suddenness of this decision. He had no definite instructions, but could he let slip such a fine chance? Putting a bold face on the matter, he took everything upon himself. The marriage contract would be ready at the required time. Meanwhile, Napoleon had summoned the Grand Council in extraordinary session. This time he monopolized the meeting. The others had nothing to do but nod assent. "I am going to marry the Austrian Archduchess," announced Napoleon. His tone was such that everybody answered, agreed. On the next day, February 7th, the draft of the marriage contract was signed at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. It was at once dispatched to Vienna by courier. Henceforth Napoleon was all impatience, not because he doubted the Austrian emperor's consent, but because he was in a hurry to get everything finished. As early as the morrow of February 7th, he concerned himself with Marie Louise's trousseau and wedding presents. He gave orders that nothing was to be made in Vienna. Everything would be sent from Paris. The Empress of the French must be dressed entirely by France. At the same time, he took into consideration his future family. Marie Louise would give him children, and, most important, a son. He could have no doubt about that. So there must be a settlement for this heir of his. Napoleon could pick and choose in Europe as he liked. On February 17, 1810, a decree of the Senate stated that the Prince Imperial would be called the King of Rome. Rome, the second city of the empire. Of course the Pope might protest, but Napoleon long since held him in his pocket. As for Eugene, who was to have inherited the Kingdom of Rome, he would receive the Grand Duchy of Frankfurt in exchange. For that matter, it was deliberately that Napoleon had chosen the title. His son would reign over Italy and Germany. Thus would be reconstituted in his favor the Germanic Holy Roman Empire, in which Napoleon's future father-in-law, the Emperor Francis, had been so dramatically dispossessed in 1806. It was his sister Caroline, the Queen of Naples, Murat's wife, whom Napoleon entrusted with being present at the official handing over of Marie Louise to the French authorities and escorting her to Paris. Caroline would make arrangements for the journey, but before that she must choose the trousseau and the presents. "Let no expense be spared," said Napoleon. Caroline hastened from shop to shop. Napoleon kept an eye on everything. He examined every article, and insisted on its being packed before his eyes. The shoes especially interested him, entranced him. He had a fancy for small hands and small feet. Those of his future wife must be minute, if he was to judge from the shoes intended for her. They were of black and white satin, taffeta, rose, blue, and green morocco, dark red velvet embroidered with gold and silver, and hemmed with swan's down and mink. Napoleon held them up in the air and turned them round and round. He imagined the little foot that would fit into them, the slim ankle, the calf rounding out and running up to the smooth knee, the line of the thigh developing and becoming lost in mysterious shadow. "They are good augury," he said. In his turn, the great dressmaker, Leroy, presented himself. He brought 10 ceremonial dresses, including the wedding dress, which cost 12,000 francs, and in addition frocks of every kind and for all occasions. It was Biennes, the famous goldsmith, at the sign of the Green Monkey, who provided requisites for the teeth, the toilet, and the dressing table, reading lamps and scent jars. Nor did he overlook chamber pots and bidets, though these were not in gold, but in silver gilt, as befitted one who was not a sovereign, but merely a consort. Then Napoleon had to think about jewels. He counted upon a stream of precious stones, upon dazzling, dream-like toilet sets, to put him into Marie Louise's good graces. He knew that his future wife had been inculcated with hatred for the Corsican, and that he had to overcome her repulsion for him. She would be hard to please if she remained unsatisfied. Trousseau, jewels, and presents altogether cost over 5 million francs. Chapter 4. Marriage. Frau Lizonsky, Marie Louise's lady-in-waiting, handed the Archduchess the first love letter Napoleon had yet sent her. Marie Louise trembled as she opened it, as though it were a Pandora's box, from which she might let loose a fresh flood of calamity upon the world. The letter read, "My cousin, the brilliant gifts which distinguish your person have inspired us with the desire to serve and honor you by addressing ourselves to the Emperor, your father, and begging him to entrust us with the happiness of your Imperial Highness. May we hope that you will welcome the feelings which have led us to take this step. May we flatter ourselves that you will not be moved solely by your duty of obedience to your parents. If your Imperial Highness's feelings should embrace any partiality for us, we are determined to cultivate it so assiduously, and to make pleasing you in all things so constantly our care, that we flatter ourselves that we shall some day succeed in making ourselves agreeable to you. Such is the goal which we aspire to reach, and we beg your Imperial Highness to favor us in our pursuit of it. With these presents, we pray God, my cousin, to have you in his holy keeping as you deserve. Your good cousin, Napoleon, at Rambouillet, February 23rd, 1810. As she read the letter, Marie Louise felt a sense of relief. She liked its unaffected tone, bordering upon the unceremonious. Might her good cousin be less of an ogre than people generally made out? One can't call his style elegant, she admitted to Frau Lizonsky, but his letter has a nice turn of phrase. I should never have thought him capable of such an achievement. Now that this letter had been delivered, Napoleon's envoy, Berthier, who had slowed down his journey, could present himself in Vienna. He entered the city incognito on March 4th, by way of a road and a bridge constructed with all haste across the ruins of the bastions demolished by the French cannonballs. The next day he made his official entrance, in a procession consisting of a single carriage, with 5 aides-de-camp, mounted on black horses, trotting behind it. The festivities lasted 3 days. Then, on March 8th, at the Hofburg, there was a formal audience at which Berthier presented to the Emperor Francis Napoleon's official offer of marriage. The Prince of Neufchâtel proceeded to hand Marie Louise a letter from Napoleon and a medallion bearing his portrait. With my father's permission, Marie-Louise declared, I give my consent to my marriage to the Emperor Napoleon. Then Frau Lazonsky pinned the medallion to her bosom on the proper side, the side of her heart. Before she did so, Marie-Louise studied the portrait closely. It was set in 13 large diamonds, which did not detract from the person it represented. He has a fine face and an imposing presence, she told her lady-in-waiting. Napoleon's letter, too, was in a most seemly strain. Madame, my sister, the granting of the request which I made to His Majesty the Emperor, your father, to unite me to you in marriage, is a very precious mark of the esteem and consideration which he extends to me, your most affectionate brother, Napoleon. From Napoleon's cousin, Marie-Louise had become his sister. She was making progress. She questioned Count Otto. Would the Emperor let her have a little garden of her own? Would he let her have lessons on the harp? Would he let her take Frau Lazonsky with her to Paris? The ambassador smiled and reassured her. Napoleon was kind-hearted. His one desire was that she should be happy. On March 9th, the signing of the marriage contract took place, followed by Marie-Louise's solemn renunciation of her rights to the Austrian throne. In the evening, at the Grand Theatre, there was a gala performance of Iphigenia in Aulis. It was a happy topical choice, since it showed Agamemnon taking Iphigenia to Aulis for the purpose of being sacrificed there. On March 11th, the marriage was celebrated with great pomp in St. Stephen's Cathedral. As his proxy, people were pleased to note Napoleon chose his old adversary, the Archduke Charles. The next 2 days were spent in banquets and other festivities. Then, on the 13th at 8 o'clock in the morning, Marie-Louise and her escort left Vienna. 12 ladies-in-waiting, 12 chamberlains, and 300 other persons, packed into 83 carriages, accompanied the new empress. Marie-Louise took leave of her family in the Privy Council chamber. It was an hour of despairing embraces, sobs, and vows of remembrance. Then she tore herself away, with tears streaming down her cheeks. For that matter, the Emperor Francis accompanied her as far as St. Polten, where the party arrived that night. Marie-Louise's last dinner with her father was a melancholy occasion. The next morning, after going to Mass, she said goodbye to him. I shall strive for your happiness and my own, she sighed. She could not have summed up a better program in fewer words. That night, Marie-Louise slept at Ems. Her handing over was to take place on French territory, at Braunau in Bavaria. There the French escort awaited her. It included all the most aristocratic members of the imperial court. As in the case of Marie Antoinette, a pavilion erected by the engineers of Devout's corps had been set up at the ceremony. The Empress reached Braunau on the 16th at 11 o'clock in the morning. She was much affected. To keep up her courage, ever since the 11th, she had read Napoleon's last letter to her over and over again. She had received it on the day of her marriage. Napoleon had written comforting words. "Madame, this letter will be handed to you after the celebration of our marriage. All the letters which reach here from Vienna speak only with admiration of your fine qualities. I am extremely impatient to meet your Majesty. If I consulted only myself, I should set off at full speed, and I should be at your feet before anybody knew that I had left Paris, but this may not be. The Prince of Neufchâtel will be at your orders during your journey. My sister Caroline wishes to keep your company. Receive her with friendship. She is very good to me. I have but one thought, which is to know what you would wish. Concern to please you, madame, will be the most constant and the most charming duty of my life. Napoleon." But now Marie-Louise had to face the French, and she was somewhat timid of them. The ceremony, however, passed off without a hitch, in accordance with the etiquette laid down for the handing over of Marie-Louise. Caroline took charge of her sister-in-law, kissed her, and introduced her to her household, headed by Madame de Montebello, her lady of honor. She was a fine woman of barely 30, with the face of a virgin and the carriage of a goddess, wearing the superb grace her mourning for her late husband, Marshal Lannes. Then, one after the other, before Marie-Louise, bowed Madame Deloquet, her lady of the bedchamber, her ladies of the palace, her gentlemen of honor, her master of the horse, her chamberlains, and her pages. It was a procession which took fully 2 hours. Next, Marie-Louise seated herself with Caroline in a carriage drawn by 8 white horses, which took her to Ronau. She made her entrance into the town to the sound of cannon, and was the recipient of all the honors due to the Empress. But here she had to undergo a fresh trial. She must take off all her Austrian clothes, even her chemise and her stockings, and put on one of the French outfits which had been brought from Paris for her. The wife of the Emperor of the French might not move a yard in her new fatherland, clad in foreign finery. Her women busied themselves around her, bedecking her, beribboning her, dressing her hair and powdering her. They took 2 hours over it, and she left their hands with a raging headache. She looked at herself in a mirror and made a wry face. Naturally, for she found herself only too much like these chattering, scented French women who intimidated and frightened her. Her journey continued at full speed over bad roads, for Napoleon was in a hurry to make his wife's acquaintance. At every halt there were receptions, festivities, galas, banquets. Marie-Louise had to listen to speeches, had to smile, respond, and look her best. She was tired. Every night she went to bed with a band of pain across her brow. At Munich she had to bear a fresh blow. Caroline insisted that Frau Lazonsky, Marie-Louise's lady-in-waiting, should be sent back to Vienna, though she knew how attached her sister-in-law was to her. Napoleon's orders were explicit: get rid of everything Austrian. Nothing escaped this anathema, not even Tisbe, Marie-Louise's little Viennese dog, to whom she had promised to show Paris. The Emperor loathes dogs, Caroline said, in her grenadier's voice. He won't have one in the palace. Marie-Louise must bow to his will. Frau Lazonsky took the little animal back with her, and a bit of her former pupil's heart too. A little later, Marie-Louise wrote to her former lady-in-waiting, "Tell my dear papa that I pluck up my courage every day." She needed all her courage, and she implored God's help to fulfill her duties to the end. On March 19th, the imperial procession reached Ulm, and on the 20th, Stuttgart. On the 22nd, it crossed the Rhine at Kehl. "Goodbye, Germany," cried Marie-Louise, with her big blue eyes full of tears. 2 days of festivities, 2 nights of illuminations at Strasbourg, and the imperial procession set off again. On the 24th it reached Luneville. Here it was met by a page who had ridden full speed from Copain. On behalf of the Emperor, he handed Marie-Louise a parcel with feathers sticking out of it. It was accompanied by a letter. In her distress, she found unexpected comfort in it. "How happy I shall be to see you and tell you all the affection I feel for you. Yesterday's courier informed me that you had caught cold. Take care of yourself, I beg of you. I was out shooting this morning, and I send you the first 4 pheasants I brought down, in token of the service so rightly due to the sovereign of all my innermost thoughts. Why can I not be in my page's place, and take my oath of fealty to you, with one knee on the ground, and my hands in yours? But imagine that I am, in imagination too. I cover your dear hands with kisses." Marie-Louise's little heart was touched. She read over again the letter which she had received the day before. "Laborde, who has just arrived from Vienna, tells me that you wept bitterly after you left St. Polten, and that you were in tears again at Munich. This distresses me, for it is my wish that Louise should never have anything but days as beautiful, tender, and charming as herself. Caroline sends word to me that you very much want to know how to make me happy. I myself shall tell you this secret, madame. It will strike you as simple, and yet it is quite true. Be really glad that we are married. When you feel inclined to give way to tears, when you are depressed, say to yourself, 'This will make the Emperor very sad, for he cannot be happy and contented unless his Louise is happy.' Was this not pretty enough? Nothing was lacking but moonlight and a nightingale. With tears in her eyes, Marie-Louise found in Napoleon a troubadour about whom the world knew nothing. His guitar had a string which rang romantically, and he played it like a virtuoso. After all, Corsica was not so far from Italy.